In this video, we are going to finish the remaining input modes for our edit screen. We have 3 modes remaining. Those are the seek mode, the tempo mode, and the song shift mode. Now we're going to address all of these modes in one video, since each of these modes are internal to the song screen itself. The previous modes,
edit screen.
To the edit screen. The previous modes, like note edit and our granularity changing, had other things that were dependent, like rendering dependencies or needing to reach out to notes to sort them, and various other things.
Mm-hmm.
So, what we want to do is stay focused here inside of our edit screen and begin with seek mode. We're already looking at the end of our input section, looking at granularity mode. So let's jump in a few lines and drop down a note for seek mode. Now again, this is going to begin with an else if statement to see if we are in seek mode. So we'll say else if current mode is equal to edit mode.seek. Then we'll begin looking for keys that are relevant to seek mode. Now there's going to be 4 keys that seek mode is going to employ. Those will be the left and right directions. Now these are going to work in kind of you can almost imagine a page up and page down fashion. Mm-hmm. Why I describe it like that is our methods, seek forward and seek back, seek by whole measures. So that way on screen it almost looks like a snapping scenario where an entire measure's worth of space moves.
Right.
So all we're going to do inside of seek mode is just directly bind the left and right keys to the seek forward and seek back methods. We're also going to employ the up and down directional keys, and we'll use these to reach either the beginning of the song or the end of the song. So you can almost imagine these as similar to home and end keys. Alright, so to get started, let's first address the right key. Say, if named input is equal to named inputs dot right, then we'll need to move forward. We already have that utility method in place called seek forward, which is as simple as that. Now we want to do basically the same thing for left, so I'm going to use this if statement. We'll duplicate it. We will change it to an else if. So we'll say else if named inputs is equal to named inputs dot left. Then we need to seek backward. Alright, that takes care of our and the seek backward method is actually called seek back. Alright, that takes care of moving measure by measure, forwards or backwards. Now let's also take a look at going to the beginning and end of a song. So we could say, let's drop in another else if. We'll duplicate this code one more time, and we'll say if named inputs is equal to named inputs dot up. We'll use up for the seek to beginning key. Now to go to the beginning of the song, all we need to do is affect the song's cursor. So we'll reach into song, and we will run or call the setCursor method, and we'll feed in a value of 0. So just tell the song to go back to the beginning. As simple as that. Now one last direction to look at. We'll look at the down key. So we'll duplicate this last else if, changing named inputs to named inputs.down, and with the down key we would like to go to the very end of the song. Now, our song end detection involves looking for the last note in a song, so we're first going to make sure that there are notes in the song before we pull out the last one. So we'll have an additional check in this case, looking at song.notes and making sure notes.count is greater than 0. So now that we know that there are notes in the list, we can grab the last note out of the list. Let's make a note variable called last note, and we'll set that to be equal to song.notes sub last note, or song.notes.count -1. Alright, now that we know where the last note in the song is, let's jump the song's cursor to that note. We'll also employ snapping to make sure that we jump in whole measure increments. So we'll do this using song. We'll call setCursor. Then we need to pass in a tick value, and this tick value is going to be snapped. So that means we'll issue a call to song.snapTick. Then the tick value that we're wishing to snap is lastNote.tick. And we wish to snap it to a whole measure. And we can find the number of ticks in a measure by looking at song.ticks per measure. That will take care of our snap tick call, and then our set cursor call, and that should take care of the down operation. Now, after all of these, we will have moved the view somewhat. We moved the song either forwards or backwards, or to the beginning or to the end. Now, for the sake of editing, since we know that the moment the cursor moves, the screen will seek to find the cursor. Meaning if the cursor was off screen to the right, then the whole view will move to find the cursor. That means if we have moved the view, we need to remember to bring the cursor with us. Otherwise, the moment we go to move the cursor, our view will just snap back to wherever the cursor is.
Right.
So once we've gotten done here moving our screen around or moving our song around, let's make a call to place edit cursor to place it at the nearest relevant location based on our song's cursor. Alright, so all of this so far is looking good. So let's test it out and see how it's working. Jumping into Song Editor, we'll load up a song, and then we'll hit Select to move over to Seek Mode. So inside of Seek Mode, if we hit the right arrow key, we can see that we're moving forward, and at this point, the measure numbers become helpful since our song is very repetitive in this section. We can see that we're moving from measure 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and finally to 5 to pass the end of the song, and so on. So now we can easily seek measure by measure. Now let's also test moving to the end of the song, so we'll hit the down direction, and we jump immediately to the very end of the song.
Nice.
We can hit the up key now, and jump immediately to the very beginning of the song. Now, before we move away from this test, there's one last thing I want to point out. Let's say that we were in a scenario where we had moved the edit cursor. So we'll just move it off to the right some. Now, at the moment, every time we enter into Seek Mode and go through the list of Seek Mode checks, the last thing we do is we place the edit cursor. Now, that's all well and good for actual moving, but the problem is the moment we enter Seek Mode by hitting the Select button, we also run through all of the checks in Seek Mode and place the edit cursor. What that means is with our edit cursor placed out to the side, if we enter Seek Mode, we're going to see it snap back to the beginning. So currently in edit mode, if we hit Seek Mode, see that our cursor jumped. Now that would be kind of inconvenient if you had already placed it and we're just going through the modes really fast to see the cursor jump on its own. In order to avoid this, all we're going to do is go into our initial code for the select button all the way back at the top of our input handling where we have select advancing the edit mode. All we're going to do is make sure that we return after entering the select button. Since the select button's only job is to advance the mode, it doesn't need to be checked anywhere later in code. So we'll simply return from the entire call to input pressed, and that'll make sure we don't interfere with anything later. So what that means is we can now go into our song editor, we can move the edit cursor, and then jump into Seek Mode, and it does not immediately affect the cursor. So now we're free to go through all the modes all day long, and they don't affect the cursor. Though the moment we do an actual seek, then you can see that the cursor gets brought along with us.
Right.
So in that case, it's just a necessary artifact to make sure that we always bring the edit cursor to wherever we're currently looking. So at this point, if we were to go into edit mode, now we have the cursor already on screen and ready to go.
Very nice.
So that takes care of Seek Mode.
So what's the next mode we're going to take a look at?
Alright, it's time to take a look at Tempo Mode. So down here inside of Input, there is Seek. Let's go just past the end of Seek. Drop in a comment and say that this will be Tempo Mode. Alright, once again we need to check the current mode. So that's if mode is equal to edit mode.tempo. Then we need to look for relevant inputs for tempo mode. Now, inside of our tempo edit mode, we're going to need to either increase or decrease the tempo. So very simple operation. Now we're going to employ 4 different inputs. We're going to use the left and right inputs to jump our tempo in 10 unit increments. So I mean jump from 100 to 110 to 120 and so on. We're going to allow the up and down directions to adjust our tempo in 1 unit increments. So we could go from 100 to 101 and so on. All right. In order to put this together, we're actually going to, since we want to keep the code as concise as possible, input by input, we're going to begin with a value that is the current BPM. So we'll make a variable. We'll actually call this old BPM, and we'll simply copy the current song's BPM. So song.bpm. Then we'll go in and we'll begin modifying the song's tempo, beginning with a check for the up direction. So we'll say if named input is equal to named inputs dot up, then we need to increase our BPM by 1. Again, the up direction was being the finer adjustment. So we'll take song.bpm and increment it by 1. Now we can do an else if to check for other keys. So say else if named input is equal to named inputs dot down, then we want to decrease our tempo by a value of 1. The song.bpm will be set to minus equal 1. So we will decrement. Alright, now let's take a look at the left and right keys. So we could do, actually at this point we could probably get a little bit lazy. We could copy one of these else if statements and paste it in 2 additional times. And that'll take care of all of our directions. That way we can look at our direction.right and named inputs.left. In the case of right, we want to increase the tempo by a value of 10. So song.bpm plus equals 10. In the case of left, we want to decrement by 10. So song.bpm minus equals 10. Alright, that takes care of all of the possible directions for adjusting tempo. Now we need to do a check, and then we can set the tempo. The reason we set this old tempo versus new tempo scenario up was so that after we have possibly adjusted the tempo itself, we'll do a check and see if the tempo has changed. The reason we're being picky about whether it's changed or not is to accurately reflect that in our changed field. So that way, we only ask the user to save the song if they really did change the tempo.
Okay.
Again, this is another scenario where if you're walking through all of the edit modes, you want to make sure that just tripping over tempo mode doesn't cause the editor to try to tell you to save the song. So we'll do a simple check of if song.bpm is not equal to the old BPM, which would indicate that the tempo has changed. Then we want to jump in and record the new tempo and mark it as being changed. Now the first thing we need to do with the new tempo is make sure that the game's tempo reflects it. So we'll do that by taking global state and issuing a call to the setTempo method. We'll pass in song.bpm to our BPM parameter and song.ticks per beat to our ticks per beat parameter. Now we also need to remember that that the song setting has changed. So changed will be set to true. Alright, that should be all of the code we need for tempo mode. Let's jump in and try it out. So loading up the song editor, we'll load in a song, and we'll hit select to move down to tempo mode. Now if we hit the right key, you can see that we're adjusting the tempo over here as BPM in 10 unit increments. So from 180 down to 170, 160, 150, and so on. Now if we hit the up and down keys, we can see that we're adjusting it in 1 unit increments, 151, 152, and so on.
Gotcha.
Now just to prove that it's working with the game, let's play the song at the current tempo of 150. And that does seem a little bit slower than it was originally. Let's drop it down even farther. Let's drop it all the way down to 60. So a very obvious change.
Yeah.
We can also change it live if we would like. Or even go faster.
Cool.
Then one last thing to point out is the way that we're calling or accessing the tempo property from our song means that we should still be using our limiting. which means if I try to go all the way down to 40, you'll notice that we cap out at 40. I can't go anything below the value of 40. And again, that's simply because we put some checking in place on the BPM property inside of song. But with that, that seems to have tempo mode working very nicely. And from here, we can move into the final mode for our editor, and that is going to be song shift mode. So in this last mode, we need to be able to take an entire song and move all of the notes forwards or backwards by one grid space.
Okay.
And again, this would be useful if you had recorded a song live in free play mode and simply wished to slide it back to the very beginning of the song itself. So we'll drop down and add a comment for song shift mode. And then we'll do a check to make sure that we are in the appropriate mode. So we'll say...
I realize it probably doesn't matter, but do these different modes need to be within else-if statements?
Looking at it, it may be more efficient going mode by mode. Because this is...
It seemed like you were doing it on some of the earlier ones, but you hadn't done it lately. I didn't know if it was just maybe an oversight.
We probably do, yeah. I was just looking at things a little bit too closely. We do want them to be else if, because that simply makes it more efficient, since the modes, as they currently stand, are exclusive. If you're in granularity mode, you're not in any other mode. So then, in that case, we do indeed want to make sure that, seek mode is already in else if, tempo mode needs to be in else if, and then in our song shift mode, that again will be in else if.
Okay, cool.
Alright. So if we're looking at moving the notes, we need to first check and see if our mode is equal to edit mode.song shift. And before we do any of the checks necessary for song shift mode, we also want to make sure that there are notes present that can be shifted. So we'll say if we are in song shift mode and our song.notes.count is greater than 0. Alright, inside of song shift mode, what we're going to need to do is allow the user to move the entire song either forwards or back. So we're going to be employing the right or left directions. Let's drop that down first. We'll say if named input is equal to named inputs.right, then we'll have a section of code. Else if named input is equal to named inputs.left, then we'll handle moving everything back. Alright, let's first address moving everything forward or to the right. So all we need to do is loop through our notes one by one and take the specific note's tick value and advance it by one grid space. So the for loop we'll use will be a for each, and I'll actually hit tab twice to bring up the for each template. We can leave the type here as var to allow it to be automatically assigned. The name of the variable here is going to be note, and the collection that we are looping through is going to be song.notes. Now, inside of our loop, we need to look at each note's tick value, and since we're moving the song forward, we will increase that value. And we need to increase it by one grid space worth of ticks. And that means, once again, we're going to need to do a conversion. Since our granularity, our grid spacing, is specified in note values, we need to find what note value that is. So we need to go look at our quarter note and adjust that to whole notes so that we can divide it by granularity. So we'll look at our song, we'll grab our quarter note value, multiply that by 4 to get to a whole note, and divide by the added granularity to get to the desired note. Now, that is the only statement that we're going to place inside the loop, so I'm going to pull the braces out and make the code a little bit more compact. Alright, now that all of the notes have been moved, we do need to indicate the fact that the song has changed, so we'll set our changed flag to true. Now, when moving the notes in the other direction, we'll do the exact same operation, but we do need to prevent the song from going past tick 0. So that means we're going to begin with the same code here in our input left, but before we move any of these notes, we need to make sure that the first note is not going to go less than 0. So we'll begin here with an if statement to do an additional check. Now we need to grab the first note in the song, so that is going to be song.notes sub 0. And if that note value's tick is going to be... Now here's an interesting scenario. We need to very lightly look into the future. We need to pretend that we have just moved this tick value and check the resulting value. Now we know that we're moving the tick by this value, so we can copy that. So we'll say tick minus, and this value is going to represent 1 grid space. So let's take the first note, move it 1 grid space to the left, and then see if that resulting location would be greater than or equal to 0. Then we'll drop this if statement around the for loop. So the idea here is we do a test. We try moving that note to the left. If that lands on tick 0 or after tick 0, then we'll consider that a valid move, and we'll proceed to move all of the notes by that value.
Right. And if it doesn't, we do nothing.
And then if it doesn't, we skip the for loop altogether.
Maybe one of those things where, like, if you're doing this on your own and you really wanted to accentuate this, if you tried to move it beyond 0 and it couldn't go, make it play some sort of an audible noise so that the editor knows, hey, you shouldn't be trying to do that.
Exactly. I mean, we could...
Like, dun-dun.
Yep, all you would need to do is load in an additional sound, because here with the if statement, you could just drop an else in place, and then that would be the case of trying to move past the beginning.
Yeah, else honk at the user.
Now we will take our changed flag and we'll actually put that inside of the if, because if we can't move the notes to the left any, then we're not going to change any notes and we don't have to mark them as changed.
Gotcha.
We'll only mark them if we do iterate through all of our notes and update them. Alright, with this in place, there's one last thing I need to tweak. In the case of moving left, we need to decrease the note values.
Yeah,
So we'll make
we'd
sure
be
that
increasing either way.
we need to make sure note tick is minus equal the dependent value. So let's jump in here to our song editor, jump into one of our songs, and move down to song shift mode. Now if we hit the right button, you can see that we move the notes off to the right, and if we hit left, we move them, but we cannot move them past tick 0.
Nice.
If we jump over to granularity, we could see that we could move our granularity down to maybe entire measures. We'll set a note step of 1, and now if we go into song shift, we see we move the song by entire measures. So if you hadn't begun a song into very long into free play mode, you have the facility to move a song very quickly.
Now, if you just continued hitting right, would that just march the notes off the screen?
Yep.
Yeah, because you'd need to have some sort of a callback to seek to scoot you over.
Right, because now we'd have to go into seek mode and go hunt down our song, which is now at position 10.
Yeah, we'll just assume that the user's not going to be prone to do stuff like that.
Especially since, the main purpose of the shift mode is to take notes that are already too far to the right and bring them back to tick 0.
Sure.
As a matter of fact, let's jump out without saving our song. Let's try one of the free play ones. All right, we already edited that one. There we go, an example of free play 2. We jump into song shift mode. We can bring those back. You will note that we can't actually reach 0 in that case because we're looking at a note value of a 16th note off.
Yeah.
Now we could change our granularity to 16th notes and then go to song shift, and then we can pull it in place.
Nice.
So that's why it's very useful to allow song shift to respect our granularity, because then we can select an appropriate granularity based on where the first note landed.
Gotcha.
So with that, that's just an example of an actual recorded song in free play. Now with that, we have our song shift mode fully implemented, and that takes care of all 3 modes for this video. So we've got seeking mode functional, we have tempo mode functional, and song shift mode. All 3 are in place. So that is not only going to wrap up this video, but that is also going to wrap up the song editor. We now have all of the modes in our song editor fully functional.
Excellent.
So with that, that's going to wrap up this video.